Hey guys, and welcome back. So over the next couple weeks we are going to be talking about an entire chapter of the Bible. We're going to be talking about the book of Exodus, and specifically the story of Moses from that book of Exodus. So this week it's going to be kind of short because I am going to give you all the ground story that you need so that going forward we can understand all that's happening with Moses. So this story starts out with Jacob, who was also called Israel. And he goes to Egypt and he takes all of his sons with him. And his sons all bring their families as well. And so he has what works out to be 70 people that are descendants of Jacob. And then there's Jacob's son Joseph, who's already in Egypt. So you've got all these 70 people that are coming to Egypt, and then Jacob's son Joseph and his family who are already there. So they all go into Egypt, and sometime later, Joseph and his brothers and all these 70 people have eventually passed away. It's been quite a long time. But then their children had children. And so now this family of Jacob, or the family that everybody called Israel, was now hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. So this family line became very, very strong. So then what happens is that a new king takes over in Egypt, and he didn't know who Joseph was. He didn't know who Jacob was. And he says to his people, the Egyptians, he says, look, these people of Israel, so these people that came from Jacob, are too many and they are too strong. We can't handle them. This is not okay. And so we need to make plans for what we are going to do to make this problem go away, because if we don't fix it, it's going to get worse. And if there's a war, they might join our enemies. We couldn't fight. We won't win. This is a bad thing. We need to fix this. So the Egyptian people decide to make life really hard for the people of Israel. So they put slave masters over them, and they turn the Israelites into slaves. And the Egyptians force all of these Israelites to build these huge cities for their king, who was the Pharaoh Ramses. And these cities were like big supply centers where they stored things. Like nowadays we would have a lot of big warehouses. Then they would have whole cities that were in charge of storing and taking care of everything they had. So because of these big store cities, the Egyptians forced the Israelites to work even harder, which makes the Israelites grow in number, and they spread out more. And so then this makes the Egyptians more nervous, which then makes them be more mean to the Israelites. There's not a lot of good things happening right now. So they force the Israelites to work very, very hard to make all these bricks and all these things so that they can make and build these big cities. And then they make them work in the fields so that they can farm all the food that they need and all these other things that they need. The Egyptians made the Israelites do all these things and do all these things for free. So there were two women who were nurses, who, whenever there was a woman who was pregnant, these two ladies would go and help her have her baby. So the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, says to these nurses, he says, when you're helping these women have their babies, you need to watch. If it's a girl, let it live. But if it's a boy, you need to kill it. So these nurses, they knew this wasn't right, and they feared God. And they knew that this is not what God would want either. And so they did not do what the Pharaoh asked of them. Now, if the Pharaoh found out this, he could kill them for this, and likely would kill them for this, and they knew that. But they were scared of God, and they loved God, and they knew what the right thing to do was. And so they let all these baby boys live. So then the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, sends for these nurses, and he says, why did you do this? Why did you let all these boys live? That's not what I asked you to do. That's not what I wanted. Why are you letting them all live? So then these nurses say back to the Pharaoh, they say, these Hebrew women, these Israelite women, they are much stronger than the Egyptian women. They give birth to their babies so fast that they're already born when we get there. So now God was good to these women. He knew what they were trying to do, and he approved of what they were trying to do. And because of what they were doing, the Hebrew or Israelite population continued to grow. And so God recognized that these nurses, these women, feared him and they loved him, and that they were helping this population of people who believed in God and supported God to grow. And so he also gave them families of their own. And so the king, the Pharaoh, says to all the Egyptians, he says, every time a baby boy is born to these Hebrews, you must throw them into the river, but let all the girls live. So now, in the second chapter of Exodus, there is a man who comes from the Levi family, and he gets married to a woman, and she gets pregnant, and she has a baby boy. So she has this baby. She loves her baby. She doesn't want to throw him into the river. She doesn't want to give him up. She doesn't want him to die. And so she hides him for 3 months. But after 3 months, babies get a lot bigger. They make a lot of noise, and they're kind of hard to hide. And so she realizes that she cannot hide her little baby boy any longer. And so she gets a big basket, and she covers it in this black stuff, black tar, and it turns it really hard on the outside so water can't get in, and it helps it to float. So she puts this little baby in the basket, covers the basket, and sends it down the river in hopes that somebody will find this basket and take her baby and take care of him, because she knows that if she keeps him, he's going to die. So she sends him on down the river, and then she sends his older sister a little ways behind him to watch and see what happens and make sure that he's all right. And so she just stays a little bit behind him and watches to see what would happen. So now this baby is floating down the river in this basket, and this little girl's following him. So the daughter of the king, the Pharaoh, Ramses, comes to the river because that's where they would bathe back then. And she has some servant girls with her, and they're walking beside the river. And so she sees the basket stuck in this tall grass, and she sends one of her slave girls to go get it. And so the king's daughter opens up this basket and sees this little baby boy who is just screaming and crying. He doesn't know what's going on. He's hungry, he's tired, he's afraid. And so she hears him, and he's just screaming, and she feels sorry for him. And she looks at him and she says, this is one of the Hebrew babies. And so the little girl who'd been following him comes up and asks the king's daughter, would you like me to find a Hebrew woman to nurse this baby for you, or to take care of and feed this baby for you? And the king's daughter says to her, she says, yes, please. So the little girl goes and gets her own mother, and Moses' baby's own mother, and brings her back. And she says, I found this woman. She's here to take care of your baby. And the king's daughter says to the woman, take this baby, take care of him for me, and I will pay you. And so the woman ends up taking her own baby back and is now getting paid by the king's daughter to take care of him and start to raise him and to feed him. And after he'd gotten a lot bigger and was eating food just like everybody else and things like that, the mother of this baby takes him back to the king's daughter, and the king's daughter adopts him as her own son. And she names him Moses because she pulled him out of the water. And that's what the name goes with. So now the crazy thing here is that during this time, she's raising him as her own son. Now this is the king's daughter. So if this baby is getting raised by the king's daughter, that means this little Israelite Hebrew baby is getting raised in the palace with the king, who was trying to kill off all these Hebrew boys. And the king doesn't even know. He doesn't know that that's where this baby came from. And so Moses is getting raised in the palace as a member of the royal family. So far in our story, we've had this entire descendants of Jacob who came in, and the Egyptians felt threatened. They didn't like them. They didn't like how powerful they were. And their solution was, let's kill them off. Let's get rid of them. And that's what the king said he wanted to have happen, and that's what he wanted the nurses to do, remember? So now let's go back to our talk, and we've talked about this with Noah before. Let's talk about faith here. The Pharaoh is the person, the Pharaoh or the king is the person who can have anybody killed whenever they want for not doing what he asked. And he says to these nurses, kill these babies. I don't want them around. There's too many people in this population already. I don't want them. Make them go away. And these women feared God, they loved God, and they had a lot of faith. And just like when we talked about Noah and the ark, if they had done what had been asked of them, instead of having faith in what they believed, a lot of people would have died, and history could have been very, very different. But because they believed in God, and because they had their faith in God, and they trusted in God, they did what they knew was right, and they did what they knew they needed to do. And because of that, there ended up being a little Hebrew baby getting raised in the Egyptian royal household. So now, next week, we are going to continue with the story of Moses, and we are going to find out what happens after he grows up in this royal house. And that's when the story gets really, really exciting. But it's important for us to remember, again, that if these women had not had the faith they did and had not saved all these babies and become favored by God because they saved all these babies, the story that we're going to spend the next few weeks learning about never would have happened. And that's a big deal. A lot of things would be very, very different if Moses had never happened. So that's all we're going to learn about for today with Moses. But for the next few weeks, we are going to continue learning about him. So fold your hands, bow your heads. We're going to have a little prayer, and then you can go on with your week. Dear God, thank you for trusting in the people who believe in you. And thank you for giving us the gift of faith and giving us that gift that is such a strong thing that changes the course of lives. And just help us to remember that we know what the right thing to do is, and we know that trusting in you is the most important thing. And thank you for helping us to just realize that that faith and that trust and that love that we give you can move mountains. We love you. Amen. So, just a reminder, there are crafts and things on our Facebook page that you can do to go along with this lesson, and be sure to hit the like button and to subscribe so that you will be able to get the rest of the story when we talk about it for the next couple weeks. Have a good week and enjoy the beautiful weather. Bye.